Right, okay then, it's 12 o'clock, so we can start on time, and anyone that's late in just has to catch up with where we're at. So I'll start off to say welcome to this session. It's on what I've called the software poverty trap. My name's David Kitchen. I'm a software engineering manager at Johnson & Johnson. I've been involved in Drupal for nearly 10 years now. And I'm currently working on our adoption of Drupal 8 at Johnson & Johnson. Turn this on first. So I have to make some disclaimers first, just to say that these are my own views and not those of Johnson & Johnson. The choice of characters based on role, and apologies for a few British cultural references. So to set the scene, I want to tell a story about poverty and debt, to make us think about what that means. And I'm going to introduce Jim, who's our character in this story. Jim is breaking out of a poverty trap. So from his great-grandfather, his family were all in manual jobs, and you might think of some Dickensian story of deprivation that the family has been in. Poverty traps are quite well defined, something that keeps people stuck where they can't generate the income to live on. Jim's broken out of this poverty trap by getting some education. It's normally well known as the best way of getting out of a poverty trap. Poverty traps are something that don't just affect individuals. Countries and companies can be affected as well. There's many effects that cause poverty traps, but for a company we might think about the culture and the retention of people in the company, or monopolies that are affecting the way that company can work, or bad governance within the company. So going back to our story, Jim's off to work now with his new education. He's got a job as a junior developer in a company, but he's only contracting, so he gets paid every 2 weeks when he's done his work, and all of his money he's getting every 2 weeks is going on all of those things. He's got his bills to pay, his living costs, his rent, his travel to work. But one day he's on his way to work and his car breaks down. So he can't get to work because his car's broken down, and if he can't get to work, he can't earn any money. So he's not got much options of how to continue. So off the car goes to the mechanic, and he gets it repaired, and then the invoice comes to get that repair work done. And anyone that's been a car owner probably can sympathize with Jim at this point as he gets that bill. And what does he do to continue? So he has to use the credit card to pay that bill. And this is where it starts to be a problem. So he's got this bit of debt now that he's got on the credit card for paying off that invoice for the car work. He's continuing to go to work, so he's getting his money every 2 weeks still, but he's only still paying all of his living costs. And that credit card bill coming every month, interest are going on there, but he's only able to pay off his minimum payments every month. And the debt's just getting bigger and bigger. And that's what we might see as the start of a debt spiral, which again, something well known, ever-increasing levels of debt, not just individuals or people. You know, we see these stories in newspapers of short-term payday loans that we see in the UK as well, but companies again fall into this, and even countries. We've seen this, maybe thinking of somewhere like Greece might have been in a debt spiral back in 2015. So that's what we think of as those two classic things of poverty trap and debt spiral. But I think there's a similar story that affects us in software development as well. So this time our story is about Rosie. and she's a product owner. And she's done all the work, got the stories into a backlog, everything's ready, and our team have started working. They're doing their sprints, building this software. They've started, first release, they've done. It's out, and they've built this nice shippable product. They continue working through their sprints. Second or third release comes out, and it's all going really nicely. But then Rosie's boss, Mr. Tootle here, comes and he's got some news stories that have got to be done ASAP. They need to be done now. Can you just push that into the backlog for this sprint? Anyone else experience this? So what's Rosie's options? Well, she's going to use the credit card and ask the team, can you just get this done? Can you do it? We need to get this done. You know, I know that we might get some technical debt. Just find a way of getting it done. And, you know, is the story sounding familiar? There's the bit of depth there. You know, it's hanging on. You know, now we're talking about what are we planning and the products. We've got goals. The boss, Mr. Toodles, wants everything to be delivered, all the features, but, you know, back in that corner, even if it's on the backlog, it's down at the bottom to fix that debt. And there we go. The team's happy they've delivered version 1 here, but underneath it, there's those debt bombs waiting to go off at some point, and they're going to throw everything off. And in fact, yesterday, in a session building high-performance teams that was given by Duncan Andrew, he called this the snowball effect. He actually talked about this problem as well. So this isn't just my opinion or your experience. Actually, academic research has been published demonstrating that teams who have adopted Scrum have seen an accumulation of huge amounts of technical debt. So my question to you is, how do you feel about technical debt on your current project? Do you feel like this? Is the technical debt coming at you from behind? Or maybe you're one of these three. Closed blind eye, you're just ignoring it, you don't want to hear about it. So we need to find new ways of thinking about and understanding technical debt. So can we bring in some sort of financial thinking? It's debt, after all. You know, we can think of other ways of thinking about debt. So in 2016, a group of academics derived what they call the 16-16-2 definition of technical debt. So this is an official academic research definition of technical debt. So something that's expedient to do in the short term that's going to cause debt, or something that's going to have ongoing additional costs of it. So we can look at debt and think about it as having two parts: the principal and the interest. The principal, again, two bits of that. The initial principle, so that's our saving, possibly that we gained by doing something quicker in the short term. Or the current principle, what is it now? So it's something we did 6 months, 2 years. I mean, we could even be talking about software where it's 10 years ago that this was done. So the current principle is going to be, what would it cost now to fix this problem? Then let's think about the interest. So that's the cost of not fixing this technical debt. You've got the first one, the recurring interest, the additional cost incurred because of the presence of that technical debt. And this could be performance, reduced velocity of the team because it's taking them longer to do the work. reduce productivity, induce defects, so and long-term maintainability of the product or project. And then our accruing interest. So I'm sure you might all have experienced this as well. You know there's something in your software that other things that you're building are relying on that bit that's got some technical debt in. And you're building things on top of it. And each of these things that you build on top of it has got that debt built into it. So you're building on top of not quite right software. And this is again taken from that definition of technical debt. So I think we can split technical debt into 3 types of debt. Thinking about the debt that we're used to. So our mortgage debt. This is things like bad code formatting or code smells. There's a low rate of interest on these. They're not causing necessarily cost, and the cost of repairing them or fixing them is not growing as the software project goes on. But there could be a big principle. It could take a lot of work to go through your project if you've got lots of lines of code that are badly formatted. Our next category, a loan, the type of loan that you take out for a car that you're going to buy. These are going to be, maybe, might have a smaller principal, or still could be quite big, cost of repairing, but they've got a higher rate of interest. Something like a performance issue that's costing you recurring interest every month because you've got to pay. So could fixing that performance issue half the cost of your servers, because you're going to reduce the need that you've got. And how does that principle, the cost of fixing that performance issue, compare with the extra cost of your servers? So it's not just necessarily about the code and the extra cost of development. It's what's the wider picture of how does that debt affect your the whole company as a wide on that project. Documentation might be that type of debt that's causing a problem on building on top of the not quite right software. You've not got the right documentation of the software that you've got, so when you start developing new software, you're going to make mistakes. It's going to take you longer to build that software because the documentation's not there for the developers. This is particularly on long-lived projects. I know that we've experienced this on projects where it's something that was built 3 years ago. You're now starting to do some improvement work to that project, and you're not finding the information, and you've got to guess how it was built because no one's kept the documentation for it. And then the final one, credit cards. You might have something that's going to be interest-free for a short period of time, 30 days interest-free on your credit card, but then if you don't pay it off in time, you're suddenly going to see huge rates of interest on it. And there might be times when it's right to use these different types of debt. An example where you might use the credit card debt is a quick fix or a business opportunity. Say you've got an e-commerce site, you want to get some functionality out for Black Friday, for some sale, some special offer that you need to get your site doing. So you're going to build something, it's going to get out, you're running it for Black Friday, you know you didn't build it right, you know it's going to cost you more to run the servers because the performance is not as good, but the opportunity cost of missing out on the extra business on that sale is going to cover or be much bigger than the interest that you're paying on that technical debt. So there are times when debt is right to take on and right to manage. And that even includes that mortgage debt. How do you manage that in a long-term big project that you've picked up? So that's our story about technical debt and how we get into those situations. But how do we think about better managing and measuring the technical debt in our projects? because without knowing and understanding what's there, we can't really keep it going. So, anyone doing Scrum here? They're doing it. They think they're doing proper Scrum. Hands up. Anyone doing Scrum? Yeah. Anyone use burn up or burn down charts like this that show, each sprint we've delivered some value. We've delivered 10 story points this sprint. We're showing we've increased our velocity. Each sprint we're delivering a few more story points. I think there's a real big problem with this report that's missing a really big, important thing. If you think about companies and how they report their accounts and finances, this is a bit like just looking at this company balance sheet here. This looks all right. We've got some assets at this company here, but this isn't the full story because we're not including the liabilities. This is what a balance sheet looks like when you look at a company, and this company's got a problem. It's in negative equity. And we're not looking at that for our software projects. So what if we were looking at a report that looked more like this? This is our velocity and our story points at the top. We're delivering these story points, but there's a problem here with this project because it's just getting more and more debt each sprint that it's delivering. But we weren't seeing that before on our previous reports. And if you're doing this sort of thing and this information isn't getting to the senior management that's looking at this project, they're really missing out on understanding what's going on in the project. And they want to see this value being delivered, but it's a fallacy if they're not seeing the true cost that's being built into this project that's going to have all of that interest on it. So this is a sort of report that you want to see for your project. This is a project that's managing its technical debt. You can see here during sprint 2, there was some credit card debt went in there. There was something needed to be done. They built up the debt, but back in sprint 3, they paid it off. So we didn't see any velocity. We didn't see anything delivered, but they've paid that debt off. And if we were showing an average, our balance sheets across there, we'd be still seeing a constant improvement, a constant level of increasing value in this project. But we're now understanding where the debt and the assets of that project are fitting in. So what can we do to better manage the finances in our projects? We need to report both the value delivered and the debt incurred. And there's a really important difference there about it being the value delivered. Because again, on those reports, we're saying how much effort we used to build things. But that might not equate to the value of what we've delivered. So there's some things might have low value, but take a lot of effort to deliver. So what's the actual value of the software that we're delivering to the business, and how does that compare to the debt? So maybe you're asking, how do we actually calculate that debt and show it? We've got some things that we have about story points. That's our way of calculating effort. But how do we measure both these things? The value, and that needs to be shown as business value, something that the product owner should be doing is that the value they should be assigning to each of their stories that they're creating. What is the actual value that this is going to deliver to the business? And there's something wider there about understanding what the end goal is for the business for this project and how that fits into the value. But in terms of debt, you've got those component parts working out what the principal is of the debt that we have and what the interest is that's being incurred on it. some things we can actually do quite easily. You know, we can work out how much effort's involved in fixing some stuff and what that recurring cost is. Like, we think we can reduce our server costs by 30% if we spend this much fixing this performance problem. One of the options, a tool that we can use for that is SonarQube. Is anyone here using SonarQube? We've got someone else down there using it. So this is a static code analysis, open source software. There's some other SaaS products that will do this for you, or linked into GitHub and Bitbucket. So every time you do a push, it will track and show you. And it's doing code analysis in terms of looking at how well your code is commented, any bad formatting. It can pick up on some classic mistakes that are made in code. So really this is something that's providing a continuous tracking and reporting that you might have used Coda as the Drupal module to report on how well your module's written. So this is going to show, it's going to also try and work out how long it thinks it's going to take you to fix those problems. So it'll give you a value of the debt in days that it thinks it's going to cost to fix it. Again, this shows you the principal cost, the cost of repairing debt, but doesn't really help you figuring out what the interest is. You know, how much is this actually costing and increasing in value? Now, you might see that if you're tracking over report. You can see this one shows, you can see a graph in the background there, so you can track how your cost, your interests might be being affected by this level of cost. Our real difficult one is finding those costs that are caused by bugs or unknown issues, and that's the real unknown that lots of us have on projects, is where a bug is hidden in the system and what it's going to cause. And again, it's where having good testing and things like that comes into keeping that debt as low as possible. So the next step in that was our reporting any debt that we've incurred, but of course we want to make sure that we don't fall into a debt problem. So that's all about making sure that you have a good budget. And I'm sure that there are other sessions, there's certainly been sessions at DrupalCons in the past about how should we think about our projects in terms of agile, using budgets and not using estimates, and trying to think about different ways that we work for working out the cost of a project. And this budgeting needs to be both on the project-wide level but on an individual sprint level. So it needs to be the responsibility of the team in a sprint to say we need to allocate this much of our time to paying off debt. And also, key one, this much of our time to training and improving our education as a team. Because if your team is not including education in their time, and this is a goal of getting everyone working on delivering code all the time, that's often a problem. And again, it was mentioned in the session yesterday. You're falling into that poverty trap issue that the team isn't able to deliver or improve because it's missing out on that education. Everyone in the team needs to understand the consequences of debt. And I think there's often, and this goes at all levels, I think developers and people working on the project experiencing very closely the consequences of technical debt. But is everyone in the project, the end business users, the management, the project sponsor, do they really understand the consequences of that debt that they're incurring? And accept the ownership for that debt as well. So back to that ticket that's come in, the ASAP ticket that needs to be done now, can you just squeeze it in? Whoever's asking for that needs to accept the responsibility that they're going to generate technical debt and understand that they're going to have to pay that technical debt off at some point in the future. Something else that I think is important here is depreciation. If debt incurs interest, the value that we've delivered also is depreciating. This might be competition. If you're building a product, your competitor has built a new feature that's made your feature obsolete. Sudden big depreciation or changing needs from your either your business, what the requirements are, or the end user's expectations. Or even things like keeping it up to date with the platform that it's running on, update to iOS. The value of your delivered product is depreciated because the user interface expectations have reduced. There's different things out there that are showing a better option. So that goes back to our report. We can't just think of value being delivered. We've got to think about how that value of what we've delivered in the past is changing. And that depreciation of the value and the combination of our technical debt leads to something called the sunk cost fallacy. I don't know if any of you have experienced this, you think, on a project where your project and the whole project has become so big that the decisions being made about it are based on, that sort of, we've already spent, we've already done this much, it's just that little bit further to get it there, to finish it and deliver it. But actually, the cost of getting that delivery might be more than saying, it's time to just go bankrupt on this project. And there are projects where that's happened, and lots of money has been wasted. And having those reports about where you are and where your debt sits compared to your value that you've delivered early on and throughout the project helps you make this sort of decision much earlier in your project. I don't know if anyone anyone in the UK might have be aware that there was a project to deliver a patient record system for the National Health Service, and this spent years and years in development, was never delivered, and was a classic example of something like this, where the sunk cost was the problem, and in the end, the project effectively went bankrupt. So there's a moral to this story. Don't let technical debt kick you in the ass. It really will if you've got a project particularly. And a little bit one here. There was a story I was telling you earlier on about Rosie and Jim. Well, as with all good stories, they live happily ever after. And any questions that anyone has?
As far as I remember, you only introduced one concrete possibility to measure technical debt. Of course, the lowest one, code measurements.
Yeah.
Are there any other solutions or possibilities to measure technical debt?
There's a lot of ongoing discussion about that, but yeah, that's basically where the next questions are. Is how can we actually find some way of standardizing measuring technical debt? And it's along the same as the things like story points and value. We all know that you can't compare two Scrum teams based on how many story points they're delivering, because the story points is just a measure of effort required that team has set on some experience of what the project is required. You might have one team that's delivering 90 points a sprint and another one that's delivering 15. But for those two projects, the one that's delivering 15 might be delivering more value just because of the way that they're pointing their items. The same goes for value and the debt. Now, there are some ways that we can see debt as I said, a monetary value, the cost of hosting a website. You know, maybe you can equate your performance to the cost of servers and say, if we measure this, it's costing us, you know, extra $20,000 a year because we've got a performance problem that might only cost us $5,000 to fix, because we just need to allocate the time for someone to spend a week fixing it. So there are some things like that, but yeah. If I move on to the further information slide I've got here, which, so one place is later, well, next year, at the start of next year, there's actually the first, an inaugural conference just on technical debt that's taking part as part of the International Conference on Software Engineering. This is mainly academics from universities who are researching software engineering practices, how Agile has changed the software engineering, and also industry participants as well, bringing in information. And the basic question at this conference next year is what you just asked. How can we find standardized ways of measuring technical debt across different projects? And there's a great resource. Previously, they were single-day workshops held as parts of other conferences, and there's an archive of the 7 years history of those. These slides, of course, will be on the session page, and these are links through to where they go through. There's also a link there to a blog post that was I read that originally inspired me to go on to investigate this sort of issue on software poverty and how this happens to projects, and thinking about how we can fix it as well. So, yeah.
How much of keeping technical debt in line is going to be about management versus maybe culture? Like, is it down to individual developers going, I'm going to hard code this value, or I'm going to maybe put this settings on PHP, or make a config screen for it? You know, like, is it down to the individual developers to constantly ask that question? Is this creating technical debt, or is it more about the project management, or
I'd say, going back to that, so everyone in the team needs to be taking ownership. But yeah, you know, you've got to question that the developers need to question. They're going to need to come back and say, if we do it this way, you need to know that we're going to incur some technical debt, and we need to add that on our debt register. But it might be, as I said, that you're doing that because you need to get this out. You know, as you say, it's quick. We can hard code this. We can get this out tomorrow if we hard code it. But it's going to take us 3 days to write a settings page and UI test that and make sure it all works. So it's the balance of understanding the value that it delivered to get that out tomorrow because you hard coded it, or the debt that you're incurring to possibly have to go and fix it in the future. So actually, when I was discussing this, someone else that's recently joined Johnson & Johnson in America had written previously a blog post categorizing 3 people that cause technical debt, or 3 views on technical debt. One is you've got the person, almost normally the developer, who wants to go, I want to do this right. I want to make sure that we don't generate technical debt. You know, we need to make sure we're doing the right thing. The next level is the sort of the broker, and this is probably your project, your product owner or your Scrum master is the broker in this situation, and then you've got the demand. I want this done now, as soon as possible. We need to get this done straight away, and that's usually someone from the business. But you know, they're all responsible for managing and either stopping or understanding how they're creating technical debt. I think there's a question there here.
One example of
Yeah. And that's I think it falls into that the principle, the initial principle of your debt. This is you've made a decision that we're going to use this architecture, but you don't know, as you say, you don't know whether that's the right decision until later on. So you don't really know if it's actually a debt or not until later on in the project. And particularly, as you say, that Scrum process leads to the higher probability of a debt incurring. And in this, one of the presentations that was at one of these workshops was about the interest having probability in it as well. It's like a risk register as well. You've got some things that, aren't incurring any interest, and your architecture might be one of those. It's like the mortgage type debt. It's low interest now, but then suddenly you discover it was the wrong choice, and it wasn't incurring any interest, and now there's something, a risk has changed. It's changed the state, and suddenly it's now incurring a lot more interest. That's if we want to compare our models again, your fixed rate mortgage is finished, you're in the middle of an economic crash, and now you had, 1% mortgage, and now it's an 8% interest rate on your mortgage. So, I think these financial models can really help, we think about it like a debt. I was doing all right on time. I think about 5 more minutes was allowed, but any more questions or thoughts that anyone wants to say as an experience of technical debt, and whether you think this sort of idea is really going to help your project?
What can we do to keep technical debt in line? Nice printing, code reviews,
I think the biggest thing is actually when you when a team is doing the backlog refinements or the story pointing, you've got to balance that. It needs more than just a point saying that this is the effort that's required. It needs those 3 combination of things. This is the value that this story is going to deliver to the business. This is the story points, the effort it's going to take to deliver it, and this is the principal debt that we're going to incur by delivering it this way. Or you might have 3 options. It might be there's going to be this much effort that's going to balance against this much debt, or we can deliver it with no debt for this much effort. And it needs to be a business decision about where it fits with the value that's being delivered and the debt that's being incurred. Because some debt is right to take on, and I don't think we'll ever have any debt-free projects. It's just, we have too many reliances, and that we might have made that bad architecture decision early on, and, I don't think we can ever avoid it, but it's the management of debt, just as you would do, and the ongoing having a budget allocation each sprint. We're going to spend 10% of every sprint paying off some technical debt, making sure that's allocated to that as well. All right, well, thanks very much. Please remember to review the session. My name's David Kitchen. If you want to get in touch, DW Kitchen is where you can, or any questions you've got and want to ask directly afterwards, I'll be here for a while before we'll go for lunch. So, thanks very much.